Okay, so we're coming to the end of the EDS conference, and I am joined with Jason Zwang, who is the Senior Managing Director of ALTRUICITY's pipeline, our major gift coaching and everything that we do. And you've been very, very active, Jason, at this EDS conference. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've had a great time here, and I think this is either my second or third one. But I love coming here. It's the best crowd because you get a little bit of everything.
Yeah. I mean, look, half of our clients are Jewish education, are focused on Jewish education, and the opportunity to come in here, especially like in year 3, I think it's year 3 maybe, and to feel like that, like, oh, we're one of the people. Like, you know, we work with many of the schools here. We have a wonderful relationship with many of the organizers. We obviously are on first name basis with. That's of course wonderful. But it's interesting is that, you know, I come from a Jewish day school background. Like I went to, you know, preschool, Jewish elementary school, day school. I went to yeshiva high school. I went to a Beit Midrash, a Beis Medrash for a couple of years. I'm really drinking the Kool-Aid, but you don't come from my background at all. And actually the way we met, Jason, was back in 2005. It was I was working at the Jewish Federation in Southbury, Connecticut. It was during my federation time. I worked in Baltimore, Connecticut, and then northern New Jersey. So it was 1 year that I was in Southbury, Connecticut. I was living in Waterbury, Connecticut. And the federation in Southbury, which was like the 84 corridor. So like basically all like the Jewish communities that were sprinkled around the 84 corridor were the road that all the tractor trailers not fall over.
Yeah, right.
Like it's a straight shot. Yeah. I don't understand why are they flipping? I never understood it. It was always tractor trailers flipping on 84. It must be the high winds. I don't know. But that federation was run. The executive director of the federation was a guy named Rob Zwang. It was my boss for 1 year when I was there. And during that time, my tenure for that 1 year, I was in charge of like JCC programming. And it was like the Hurricane Katrina had hit. And there was obviously much cleanup that needed to be done. The Jewish communities in the South were definitely hurt in a very big way. And we decided to do a benefit concert. And you, son of Rob Zwang, Jason Zwang, basically was in charge of this entire benefit concert because you were a musician, you had a band, you basically brought to the table a bunch of other bands. You were like you were clearly an organizer. Like the apple didn't fall far from the tree as like your ability to convene people and bring people together and we hit it off immediately. I mean, that's my recollection.
Oh yeah.
I mean, maybe I was fawning over you and you weren't necessarily reciprocating. I don't know, but you were clearly memorable. And even though I left after the 1 year, we didn't. I would say maybe we spoke a couple times here and there over the years, and I knew that you got into a similar space. You're working in the philanthropic world. What were you doing professionally? Once you obviously after you left there, you went to college, right? Where did your career start? Like what were you doing professionally? Well,
first of all, I have to say that that show was a ton of fun, and I actually remember calling you more than I remember. Holding back on calling you because I was like, I'm calling him too much. There's no way that this guy thinks I'm normal. And, you know, when I was younger in college, I had this just unbridled like energy. And my self-awareness was at like an all-time low. You know, I was.
Well, you're a teenager. You're a little bit more than a teenager, but like I don't think anyone at that age has really good self-awareness. Cut yourself some slack, my friend.
Like let alone people that are like professional guitar players in college. You know.
Yeah.
And so I came back from UConn stores, and you know every weekend basically or during the week, and yeah we would plan this thing, and it was great because Hurricane Katrina, you know, was a big deal. And I basically saw the win-win-win. Like, you know, my dad had this federation. You know, you were a guy that was raised listening, you know, to all sorts of like great rock music.
Yeah.
You know, I think like Guns N' Roses and like
right? Sure, of course. I mean, I was a kid of the 80s and 90s, so anything. I mean, Guns N' Roses was started really in 87, 88. You know, until 93, until they fell apart. But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of bands, the grunge era bands. I was a big concert goer, so even though I grew up in the yeshiva day school system, I was a little bit of an anomaly where the music was we definitely connected over music. That was it. Even if we didn't connect over our yeshiva background, my yeshiva background, your background, we definitely connected over the common music interest.
Yeah, and I kind of want to come back to this, but I want to answer your question.
Yeah.
So I don't know that the question of like what was I doing professionally is so interesting, but what I'll say is that I want to tell you what I was doing and why I think that brought me to where I am.
Okay.
And so at the time, I was working in a community action agency that, I'm sorry, not at that time. It was a few years later. So I graduated college, and I immediately went out, and it was the Obama administration, and I got hired by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And it was a rotational job inside of a community action agency.
Right.
So their job has community action agencies been around since the 70s, and their job was to basically offload the responsibility of the federal government into local communities to attend to issues like poverty and elderly, protections and community organizing and all sorts of things. And so I was in this rotational program, and so I really had a great opportunity to see the different parts of this kind of wacky, in hindsight, pretty wild organization that really is the chief bureaucratic organization that you can have in the nonprofit world. I mean, it was just wild. And in that time, I knew that I wanted to do something important. I had my college degree was in industrial organizational psychology with a minor in neuroscience, and I was really interested in how organizations work and how people think. And so when I went in there, I was like, I wonder what my place is going to be. And I remember going every day and being like, I'm working in this thing today, I'm working in that thing today, and everybody always secluded me back, either because I had so much energy or because they were actually fascinated by the way I would do something. I'm not really sure in hindsight because of what I told you earlier.
Right.
But I was always sort of put into the category of Jason, can you go talk to this guy and explain what we're doing? So I remember senators showing up for things because we'd be working on something, and they would be like, Jason, can you go talk to the senator? And I was like, there are people older than me here. There are people that are more experienced than me. Why me? And I thought it was interesting that I kept getting put in that place. And what I eventually realized is that there are great people in the world that are the program people.
Yep.
And there's always going to be that need to go out and do the work. And my skill set and really my interest was understanding the complex parts of what was going on and then synthesizing it, bringing it down to something simple, and then helping explain the why. And that's really where I started to realize that was my power. And then simultaneously realizing that organization couldn't do anything. It would live and die by federal funding.
Right.
And I was like, this is way too complicated.
Right.
And so I said, we need money for sure to be able to do these programs. We need people to give us that money because these other programs are just way too complicated. And the time that the organization, they had 1/3 of the organization was spent on people just to do reporting. I was like, this is crazy overhead.
Right.
You know what I mean? Millions of dollars of overhead just on reporting. So anyway, that was my first intro into that, and I immediately went from there back to University of Connecticut and got hired as a fundraiser. And at that time, and this is sort of interesting, and I think partly important to understand here, just for our industry, is that fundraising as a profession, where the science came into play with the art, really began in 2008. And that's because we had the financial downturn, and the bottom of the market dropped. And for donors, we suddenly realized as organizations in 2008 that we had all these big funders, and then when the bottom fell out, there was no backfill for those. And everybody was clamoring for what do we do to do this? Because our organizations still need to operate, and those who were in a very, had a very thin operating margin and relied on philanthropy were
gutted.
They were gutted. That's right. And so when I got hired into UConn as a leadership giving officer. This was the first move that organizations made in this country, and really the first in the world, to start building pipeline between their annual campaign stuff and their major gifts. And so it was.
Well, so I just want to draw a distinction here, because when in our world, major gifts was always an annual campaign function. In other words, you would have a donor who could give you $10,000, and they were going to give that $10,000 through the dinner or through a crowdfunding campaign or other kind of mechanism that would serve the general operating budget. But what you're just saying is there's a different kind of major gifts that was living outside of an annual campaign.
Right.
So maybe you want to just clarify what that means.
So good point. So I think major gifts nowadays is got a ton of different definitions, and so I would say that in the secular world, major gifts is when we participate in the annual campaign as donors, but we also have another gift that we're considering around partnership for something that I really care about as a donor that organization happens to be working on, and that's real major gifts.
Some big problem that could be solved.
Right. And notice I'm not attaching a dollar amount to it, because I think that's really subjective. and that depends on. I've worked with donors that like back in the day that were giving $1,500, but to them it was a major gift, and they attended to it like that, and I attended to them like that. Like we were solving a problem, we were in a mission together, and it was outside of their annual contribution. They were going to do something extra big this year because the dean or whatever wanted to do this particular thing for this reason, and that what the dean was doing was something the donor really cared about in the world. And so that's what, to me, that's what major gifts really is a position, a posture.
Right.
So that's sort of how I got my start into fundraising.
Yeah, I mean, so what's interesting for what we're touching on right now is you came on board to ALTRUICITY because you have the major gifts background. And we realized in our firm that the underpinning of any successful organization is to develop a strong cadre of major gifts, right? No matter what you do throughout the year, if you're going to do an event, a dinner, or any kind of peer-to-peer fundraising effort, or any parlor meetings, if you don't have a strong foundation of donors who are carrying the organization, major gifts, then a lot of those other things are hard to come together. And I really recognized that I needed somebody who came from that world to help build out the major gifts coaching that we provide, and that's where you came in. But you were also the benefit you came in was you didn't come in with the saying, okay, well, this is how they do it within the organized Jewish community, right? This is the way it's done, right?
Yeah.
And just codify it. Like that was not what we were looking to do. You came in and say, no, let's build it out the way it should be built out, regardless of what people are used to. And if you have to educate the Jewish education world, the religious, the synagogues.
There are some formal principles that we took from the secular world that were not about cultural differences. They were about humans, the way that people and human beings attended to challenges and wanted to have conversations and wanted to learn and grow. That stuff was not because you were Jewish or because you were Christian or whatever you are. It's because you're a person.
They're universal human principles.
That's right. And so,
what are some of those things that come to mind that you think are really important to inject into the way we do business?
Well, I think the question is, what are those things, and where do I see that there's confusion around those two things between the especially the Orthodox world and like the secular world? I think that there is. So one of the things, people loved being asked questions. They love to talk about themselves. And talk about their interests. And there's always an interest in self-exploration. And I think that the Jewish world, and particularly the Orthodox world, has been so over-solicited for so long. And part of this really goes back to obligatory giving. And part of it's cultural, and that's true.
Like if you're Jewish and you live in Chicago, you should give to your local federation, right? Like it's shoulda. I think there's a mandatory tax.
That's right. And I think that, I think that's a hallmark of something that's a very important part of who we are as Jewish people. However, because of some of the tools that are out there, we've really like it's like cocaine. Like we've taken the essence of solicitation. We've taken the essence of solicitation and just pulled out the heart.
Right.
And just started to figure out ways we could solicit things faster and faster and faster and more and more and more. And unfortunately, people listen because there's this obligatory piece of it. And it started to undermine the real relationship.
You create false urgency. You have situations where there's a quid pro quo element, like, okay, well, I'll give to your thing if you give to my thing, right? So it creates this entire transactional approach and a cynicism, right? Like, oh, right, here it comes the solicitation again, right? Like there's no, it's always about the organization. I think it sounds like is that what you're doing is you're putting the organization first, and you're not actually asking the donor what they want to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the real thing. So asking questions. Putting things about, making sure that when we talk about partnerships, it's not about the organization, it's about the donor. These are things that it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or you're Orthodox, or if you're secular. Those are just human things. So how do we bring those truths into the Orthodox world? And I think that what I've realized after 4.5 years of working with ALTRUICITY is that the Orthodox world here in the United States is ready for that conversation. I think they've seen enough damage caused by really fast and simple, high-level transactional solicitations, and are realizing that there has to be more there, which is the same thing that happened in 2008 that I talked about when we realized there's no backfill for these donors.
Yep.
So it's like they have a few families, and then they need more donors to happen. But in order to make that happen, you have to get to know people. And so inserting what we use in the secular world, like qualification practices, best practices around that, real cultivation, deploying a narrative in a way that you tell a story and keep people compelled by the problem we're solving.
Right. By the way, it's interesting because it sounds like such a foreign concept. Like if you tell a fundraiser who's in the system, you need to go into a meeting, and instead of vomiting out all the virtues of your organization, we do this, and to actually ask good questions that can help qualify the person as a potential donor, to them they're like, do they want to actually participate in an exercise like that? Does the donor and there's a very strong skepticism. But when even just our simple role play, and I asked the fundraiser basic questions about like what their motivations are, and I remember being at a board meeting of a client of ours, a school based in Lakewood, New Jersey. So there's a tremendous amount of skepticism and cynicism there, right? Like over solicitation all the time. And there was a board member who communicated to me that like, I can't imagine anyone giving you any more than 5 minutes to have a conversation and just ask for the gift and move on. So I said, well, do you mind if I, role play on you? And I basically said to him, I posed the question like this. I said, look, you're a very big philanthropist in the Lakewood area. You give to a lot of places. Is that correct? Is it fair to say you give to a lot of institutions? And he said, yeah, I give to a lot of places. And I said, and I'm assuming that a lot of them feel very transactional. They're, quid pro quo. Some of them, like someone gave to your thing, you have to give to their thing. And other ones just, they solicit you every single year at the same time and it's done that. I said, but are there charities that you give to, tzedakahs that you give to, that make you feel warm and cuddly inside? Like this is something that actually I care about. And he said, yeah, I've got some that I really care about. So I said, why do you care about those? What are it about those organizations, about the work that they're doing that really moves you? What in your background speaks to that, saying that this is a priority of yours? And as soon as I asked him that question, it like clicked in his brain. He's like, oh, no one has actually ever asked me that question. This is a major donor, right? People come to him all the time, and no one bothered ever to sit down with him and say, what motivates you? And the moment he heard that question, and he felt the urgency to say, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And now he saw that this was not going to be a 5-minute meeting. Obviously, we just did as a role play, but he realized that this is going to go from being a 5-minute conversation to probably a 45-minute conversation, because now he's going to really expose or express his vulnerability and say, this is what I care about and why I care about it. Now, if you are an organization and you ask those kind of questions, what you are immediately given is a trove of information to say, is there anything that this person is communicating to me that lines up with our own organization's values and priorities? And if the answer is no, like, they're interested in saving the whales because they saw, a killer whale get hurt at SeaWorld or something like that, then okay, then they're not meant for you, which is a helpful qualification to say they're not right. But more often than not, if they are someone who is in your orbit and they're philanthropic, let's say for Jewish education, and they are communicating what aspects of Jewish education are important to them, it's your opportunity to leverage that and say, you know what, I think we as a school can provide value to you in the terms that you're looking for and what you care about, instead of coming up with our hands open saying what we need. And this is a completely new paradigm that impacts whether it's annual campaign fundraising, whether it's visionary major gifts type of fundraising. It's just treating donors like they're actual partners, not just paying lip service to it, but to actually do it. And you really brought that into our firm, and all the other coaches that we have that have either come in through your own network or you've trained and developed kind of a roadmap on how we train professionals to be able to major gift coaches to work with our clients, is really born out of this. It was my eyes opening and saying, wow, I had over a decade of fundraising experience, but I didn't raise money like this. And I wish, it's almost like a feeling of regret. Like, I wish I knew this information. I wish I was armed with this in 2002 when I was fundraising, instead of learning this as a consultant through Jason Zwang.
I think that we're really onto something here. And I have to say, at this conference, it's been interesting, and because I have had several people come up to me at this conference, which I have not had happen before, where they said to me, you guys are kind of on a mission to change Jewish philanthropy.
Exactly
and
right.
I've heard that like at least 3 times in this conference by people who've come to see us in Connecticut or in New Jersey or in Colorado or here in Florida. And, we sort of have this shtick where we're debunking these things. And what's interesting is like they'll hear it from me and they'll challenge me because I don't wear a yarmulke. But if they hear it from you, they're like, well, okay, he knows what he's talking about. Like,
Right.
And so you're like the front porch, and I'm getting in there with the tactics and the detail.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the good shtick we have. And what we have also done is created a firm that can hear what a client is saying and be honest about what needs to happen, because we're using human truths, not selling the products we have. And we've designed what we do to match the human truths rather than being good at something and then everything funnels into this one product or two products we have. We've responded to what the real needs are and how we do it. In the tool that I built with you, the pipeline, which in Tali Gottlieb, that tool is directly reflective of how and also what the elements that are required for a solid major gifts relationship, how that needs to happen, from marketing and how you communicate about your organization to figuring out who it is you talk to and why, and at what time, and then deploying those things and then keeping yourself accountable and then measuring your success. That entire life cycle is covered by the pipeline now, and that I'm really just supremely proud of. I really am, because I think that it is the tools that can change this challenge in the Jewish world is held within that particular tool.
Yeah. Look, the podcast is called Date Your Donors, and the idea of actually listening to the interests and the passions of the other person is an obvious metaphor to say, like, look, you do this in your own personal relationships.
Right.
If you're just gunning for your own needs, then you're not taking into account the other person. So this sounds like it would be an obvious thing, but it's definitely something that our industry is learning. I think they're getting better at it. I think they're open to it. I think the ones who are incorporating it, we have a client that has inherited donors that's like third generation of some donors, and even with a relationship that goes back 3 generations, they're now coming out of meetings now saying, oh my gosh, like I never had a meeting like that before. Like that was the first time, like I feel I had a breakthrough after like 30 years of relationship.
That's right.
So that is
well,
really
and also
fun.
saying some of the uncomfortable truths. You know, I remember the first client that you ever gave me, because I came to you and I said, I want to try out this consulting thing. And I said, you don't have to pay me. Of course, you're generous, and a mention you said, I'm going to pay you. And I said, okay, well, thanks.
I'm doing this
and
for
so
free.
you gave me this client, and I promptly lost the client in about 3 weeks. And I was like, I was like so embarrassed and like, what are these guys going to like?
He's
fire
never
me?
going to give me another client.
Yeah,
again.
I can't believe that I did this. Now, and then you came to me, and so the story, what happened was, we worked with this particular yeshiva, and they had hired a director of development. And this is a well-known yeshiva. They hired a director, and because of what we're talking about, the lack of understanding of real relationship building and solicitation beyond annual campaign and transactional fundraising, they hired a guy that guy thought, the director thought, that he was there to build friendships. I'm going to bring you back to meet alumni. We're going to have a little events. So I'm going to like do these kinds of things. And I think that was good, well-intentioned. But I said to him, at what point do you start talking about giving? Because your CEO believes you're a revenue-generating element in the organization, and you believe you're a revenue-neutral organization in the element. And you guys haven't talked about that yet. And so I brought the CEO on a call, and I remember asking the director, I said, I want you to tell me about the yeshiva. Tell me why it matters. And he went on for about 8 minutes with this just horrific description about their conservative values and all the just wandering all over the place. And the CEO's face was just floored. I mean, he's just open mouth. I can't believe, like, this guy, not only is he not really that interested, but also, or he's interested, but he doesn't really understand what we do, but also he's not getting anywhere towards fundraising.
Right.
And so I said to him, at some point, this is going to become a bait and switch. There's a difference between friend raising and fundraising. And when you do that, you've become a wolf in sheep's clothing. When you go to those people who you've created friendships with and you start to talk about solicitation,
surprise,
they're
sucker.
Say, yeah,
I'm
surprise,
here
here I am. It's like you're much better off on the front end saying what your intention is and people being like, it's not for me. Then they're not for you.
Right.
No problem. Move on.
Right.
And this was a huge yeshiva. So anyway, I lost the client because he ended up letting that director go, and then there was no need to have a consultant because they didn't have a director.
They didn't have someone to work with.
And I said to you, I'm so embarrassed I lost this client. What am I going to do? He must hate me. And you said, why? You helped them. And that was the moment for me where I realized that consulting isn't a bunch of bad guys. You can do this with a backbone. And you can do this for the betterment. but you have to really care and carry that through all the way. And yeah, you may not have immediate wins all the time, but your long-term relationships, the things we're seeing come through at EDS, at EDN, at other conferences, those relationships that we have with people are coming from doing the right thing. Just yesterday, one of the members of one of the biggest crowdfunding company, we sat with him with dinner, and he said to me, Jason, I don't know if you know this. He said, but your name comes up to me at least once a month in my client meetings when I'm doing things. And I said, wow. And he's like, with clients all over the world. Now, I am a secular guy, right, that has no exposure to this prior to 4 years ago meeting you.
Yep.
And now we're to a point where this is coming up. We have a movement that's happening.
Yep.
A shift is occurring, and the data is showing now. We are just maturing. So I'm really excited about sort of where we're at and the potential of where we're going. And we have things to figure out, and that's true. But I know we're onto something good.
Yep. No, Jason, I have tremendous gratitude. This is it's a journey. I don't think anybody who starts a business has a clear picture of where it ultimately goes. I think there's a naivety, a healthy naivety. I think if people knew just how much good work goes into something, they'd be like, no thanks. I think I'll do something else. Yeah, because that naivety is a blessing.
And by the time you figure it out, you're too deep in.
You're too deep in. You're like, this is my world now.
I'm in it.
Yeah. They're like the famous meme. This is fine.
It's like having kids.
Yeah. Basically, like, I'll have a kid. I can do this. Yeah. Like, oh no, you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
So no, but I have tremendous gratitude. I appreciate all the work that you've done. I appreciate continue to be working with you in a number of capacities. I don't even know what it looks like in whether it's in 6 months or 6 years, but I do know that we are on the same page. We may have different upbringings, but we kind of have joined together. We found a nexus where we do align, and that's always exciting. It's an exciting. Sometimes there's a Yiddish expression that man plans and God laughs, because we like to plan things. We like to, especially in our world, right? Like in our world, we like to be so organized and have our act together. And then, God is like, yeah, that's nice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hold my beer. We're going to change things up on you. But it's usually for our own betterment. Whether it means us learning a lesson, whether it means opening up a different door that we didn't even realize was there. And, I think that's been the case so far. So
listen, one thing I want to say before we conclude this, I've been meaning to say this in a wider audience. So I want to use this time to say it.
Okay. I'm nervous, but go ahead.
You don't need to be nervous,
Okay.
but I think it's a good thing. What I have learned as a secular individual coming into the Orthodox world for this, as somebody who provides a service, is that this group of individuals, men and women, because of the Jewish education that they receive and the values that they receive through that Jewish education, they are accessible, they're self-effacing. I mean, it's hard to draw conclusions about a whole group of people at once, but I am so confident in what I'm saying right now. This education system in this world has built people that can hear the hardest news, the toughest criticisms, and they will look at it and say thank you and turn it into where we need to go next, even if it's a great cost.
I got goosebumps, Jason, so I think you are very
totally
on point.
True, and I cannot tell you how much I respect that. And so it's just made my job easy and fun. It's exactly what I wanted to do, and I know that we're changing lives of kids and missions every day.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Jason.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thanks for coming to EDS.
Yeah.
All right, and maybe next year.
Next year.
All right, thank you.